Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our event where we're looking at the evolution of beauty. Thank you very much for attending. We have an excellent guest panelist today who will be taking us through their thoughts and ideas about what will be happening as we move forward, and perhaps more concentrating on the good things rather than some of the bad things that we've lived through this year. I'm just going to go through the house rules just so that everybody is aware of what and how the hour-long webinar will operate. We've muted all participants, but should you be wanting to ask a question, that unmute will obviously come in. You can ask questions throughout the session, and you can do so by using the raise hand feature in the participant panel, and we will endeavour to answer as many questions as possible. And if we don't have time to answer your questions, please keep them in the chat room and we'll try to answer at the end of the session. So thank you. Just by way of introduction, and I'm sorry I didn't do that at the beginning, I'm Stirling Murray. I'm the founder and MD of The Red Tree. We're the UK's leading international beauty brand consultancy, and we believe ourselves to be a powerhouse of ideas, insight, and inspiration. We have a great deal of beauty expertise and a global client list of major corporates, private equity houses, and well-funded startups. And we believe ourselves to be the company for vision, strategy, action, and implementation. This is the first webinar we've done for 2021. We hope there will certainly be others throughout the rest of the year. And this is also one of the first ones where we've actually got a group of panelists who have great experience across different sectors of the beauty industry. And so I'd like to introduce each. And during the sessions, many of the questions will obviously be directed at each of the panelists. So starting with Fiona Glen. Fiona actually works for The Red Tree, is our head of projects. And Fiona has held senior buying roles for major retailers like A.S. Watson before joining The Red Tree in 2019. Michael Sheridan, a bit like me really, is a veteran of the beauty industry and founded Sheridan & Co. In 1983 and has more than 40 years experience in the retail design industry. Michael has an in-depth knowledge of brand architecture, retail interiors, pop-ups, point of sale and packaging, and has a particular interest in shopping psychology and the use of technology in retail. Araminta Sheridan, who, like her father, is very well steeped within the beauty industry, was the founder of Araminta Marketing. And Araminta started to consciously market to consumers through meaningful content. She's worked alongside companies like Sheridan, Focus Breathing Rooms, Ballymore, Future Olympia, and Atlantic Technology. And her role is to make sure a company's digital marketing experience reflects the client's offer. Claire Cherry is an investor and leads True Capital's early stage investment fund and has invested in core brands like Bleach London, War Paint for Men, and VITL. True is Europe's only vertically integrated retail and consumer investment firm and specializes in the intersection of digital technology and changing consumer behavior. Kate Nightingale is a consumer psychologist and human brands expert. She founded Style Psychology, a human experience consultancy that works with retail, hospitality, and tech brands across brand strategy, customer experience, design, and innovation. Their clients include Swarovski, Snug, Dowsing & Reynolds, and Klarna. And Kate is also a lecturer at Regent's University, the London College of Fashion, and L Education. So to kick this afternoon session off, as I said, we're going to be looking at the evolution of retail, what we expect to happen, what impact that may have on potential investors, how it would change consumer psychology and behavior, and how social media can come across those and work in tandem with all the things that are going on. And what will retail look like, not just next year, but in the years to come. My first question really is for Michael. Michael, I mean, you've got incredible experience of all things retail. through, you know, a long period. I mean, what do you feel is actually going on now within the beauty industry, particularly at retail?
Thank you very much, Stirling. Good afternoon, everybody. That's a really good question. I think, you know, we were already in a period of somewhat rapid change last year before we had the lockdown. And I think what we're going to see is that that rate of change will feel and perhaps be even faster as a result of physical space being in major lockdown for this period of time, this last few months. And actually, in many ways, I see as a sort of the pace at which retail was developing, particularly the relationship between physical and digital, to my mind, was perhaps a little slow. And I think what we'll see is that a great acceleration moving forward as the stores become open again and we get shopping again. We've been watching the States really carefully, and they've had many more of their stores are open and operating, and already we're seeing some of the really interesting developments in that market that are getting traction. I have to say that the brands that have close relationships with their customers already, whether that's in a physical space or digital space or actually combined, I think are the ones that are going to be at the forefront in this market. But the great news is that physical space will remain. It will remain the core of shopping. Despite what's going on right now, still 8 out of 10 purchases are made in a physical space. Of course, that's skewed by in different sectors, but I believe that what we're going to see is we're going to see a resurgence of retail. People who want to get out of their homes and their houses, and they want to get back into stores and be in a community, a physical community. So there are lots of things that are going to be happening, and it's paramount, really important that we're ready to receive them when they come. I've just jotted down a little short list of things I think that, you know, I would like to consider during the hour, not necessarily all in my first response, but that we make sure that we cover them, and that they are that we look at very carefully at the relationship between physical and digital again. If a year ago, you know, the relationship was 1-to-1, then I suspect that the relationship probably now will be 1-to-2. The online facilities that we need to be offering, the kind of, you know, digital access to brands at all levels needs to really ramp up. And also that, but most importantly, that needs to be worked in conjunction with what's happening in the physical space. The two need to work together. There are great examples in the States of retailers that have done that and are now working on parallel development of their digital and physical space operations, and they are the ones that are winning out. They're people like Target and Walmart, the bigger ones you might think, but of course these are big retailers that sell a lot of beauty products as well. So I think the digital aspect is really important. I think the mixture of convenience and pleasure, or delight if you like, that whole kind of, you know, relationship needs to be thought out very carefully. I think that customers have a much higher expectation, not necessarily are looking to, you know, leave with a huge shopping bag, but they're certainly interested in access, but also getting more for their money than perhaps they've had in the past. So those two need to coexist. I think that the development in partnerships is changing, and that's really interesting. We're seeing some new retail models coming into the market, the likes of the sort of Loops, Flying Solos, Naked Retail. They're all finding new ways of bringing products, particularly beauty products, in front of consumers in a physical and digital perspective, and they're mixing up the way in which they merchandise and they present brands. So that's really interesting. And I think also, you know, some of the faster growing categories could make really good tools for disruption, change the paradigm in terms of how we look at different sectors and how we make the whole beauty sector more interesting. And also, I think perhaps a slight change in attitude, perhaps a move from selling objects to providing solutions. We're seeing that a lot in the health sector at the moment. I think, you know, with the demands that have been put on the medical world right now, kind of, you know, health solutions will be a booming market if it isn't already. And finally, you know, some of the growth opportunities, some of those may actually be under our news, and in the short, under our nose even, in the news, but under our nose. Finally, that you know, we in the short term, we'll all be leveraging footfall, and it's really interesting to see that some brands are perhaps going into you know, kind of looking to get back in with retailers with multi store distribution. You know, that's really important for them to get their volume back up as quickly as possible, but also, as I say, to make sure that they don't miss out the opportunity of service. So those are sort of 6 areas that are front of mind in the sort of Sheridan world that we're particularly talking to our customers about. I know that, for instance, Kate will tell us much more about shopper habits, etc. And I'm very happy during the course of this afternoon to expand on any of those other areas and give examples. But I'm very conscious that there's other fantastic panelists here as well. So perhaps I should let one of them take over.
Michael, thank you. That's I'm sure we're going to refer to those 6 things and points you mentioned. One of the words you mentioned, or a couple of words you mentioned, was the pleasure and delight of physical shopping. And certainly I would think all of us, you know, in lockdown missed that shopping experience. Kate, I mean, you're obviously studying consumer behavior all the time. What's your views on the changes that the lockdown, the virus has had in terms of consumer habits, and how permanent will that change be?
Yeah, so no pressure, guys, obviously. Great point, Michael. I especially love the aspect when you mentioned that it will be more about providing solutions, not products. And obviously, this is one of those things that has been already sort of bubbling under the surface, and customers have been better responding to brands that have been communicating rather than products and products features. We're communicating actually the psychological, emotional, social, health, wellness focus kind of benefits of the products, as well as kind of focusing really on building strong and intimate relationships with their customers. And that word intimacy is something that has been something that we've been sort of exploring quite a lot. And inadvertently, we always have been building that within any of our projects, any of our sort of strategic approach to the brands, or any of our physical retail concepts. And the intimacy element is such a necessary aspect of our overall well-being and even physical health. Our immune system even is much better if we have a better intimacy with human beings. So obviously this is something that has been considerably missing, and this is only one of the aspects of our basic necessary need of belongingness that has been heavily undersupplied and really sort of, you know, badly sort of serviced, so let's just call it like that, by brands even before the pandemic. And obviously that has been considerably further undersupplied throughout, you know, from the lockdowns that started last year. And that aspect of building intimacy, building relationships, building belongingness through, for example, brand communities, those are things that already have been necessary for brands to include within their strategies and build their brands, their offerings, their products, their services based on that even before the pandemic. And now it's something that almost verges on, you know, on social service to a certain degree, because, you know, yes, we're talking about a pandemic from a virus, but we're not talking about a pandemic from loneliness or social isolations or mental health issues, which have already been happening considerably and impacting considerably negatively on consumer behavior and the actual sales, therefore, that are happening, and on relationships that the customers have been building with brands. So if we look at a sort of basic buildup of a human being, that aspect of belongingness, of relationships, of intimacy, have been driving a lot of our purchases, and we have been better connecting with the brands that, for example, are more transparent. that have founders or actual human beings or anthropomorphized characters facing the brands, because those are the brands that we feel like we are building a friendship with or a romance with or something else. So they're almost replacing relationships that we can't, are not able to, because we, for example, don't have social skills that are good enough, or are simply not able to, for example, find the right relationships partners. So we're almost trying to kind of replace the real life human relationships with the brand relationships. And that has been something that a lot of brands have been, when they were doing it good, they've been really benefiting on. And this is a demand basically by now that every brand should be behaving, looking like, speaking like a human being. So that element of intimacy is something that is going to be definitely demanded. Whether that's an intimacy directly with the brand, whether that's an intimacy by a brand fostering really good, meaningful and in-depth social relationships, or supporting growth and deepening of already existing relationships, such as, for example, between a parent and a child. Those things, those brands that really have been doing it. So let's look at Lego, for example. They have always been doing it, and they are always doing great, and they are constantly innovating on that fact that they're building a relationship between a parent and a child, and between a child and their imagination. And that's what, that's what they have been selling, not Lego blocks. That is what they have been selling. And that is one of the really crucial elements that will always be there, and that will really be running the show for majority of the brands. Now, the second element that has been really badly undersupplied, even before the pandemic, is our sense of safety. And I'm not talking about a physical safety from a virus or from terrorists or anything like that. This is one of the elements, but also emotional, psychological safety from everything. So even aspect, for example, of a sense of control over our life, over our decisions, is something that fuels our sense of safety. And both sense of control and sense of safety is again necessary for our well-being, necessary for us to be good members of a society, necessary for us to make informed, happy, fulfilled decisions, and to actually be satisfied, for example, from our relationships with the brands. So, for example, one of the manifestations of sense of control is personalization and co-creation. Again, something that has already been extremely powerful before, but we all have been seeing how it sort of turned into almost this craft, DIY, meaningful social interactions with our family and friends who we're living with, because we didn't have a choice, or because we had time and we actually had, opportunity to think, or because we actually realized that, for example, making a gift is a meaningful effect on our relationships. And those are things that are not going to go anywhere. Or even things like making a dinner for our mom on a mom's day. That is such a simple thing, but a lot of brands that have been providing, information, content, products that actually helped people to do that, those were the brands that were benefiting from that. So that kind of ability to sort of personalize or co-create with the brands. And co-creation is also a form of controlling our relationship partner, meaning the brand. We are in relationships with the brands that we love, with the brands that we like, with the brands that we use to represent our identity to the world. So needless to say, we want to have some control over those brands. And if a brand is not giving us that control, the only thing we're going to eventually become is frustrated, or more specifically, pissed off with the brand, and we're going to drop them. So
okay, that is quite amazing stuff. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop you there because you'll have plenty of time.
No worries. I was pretty much finished.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. Human relationship, brand relationship. I personally am a great advocate of the shopping experience, because I think when physical stores remained strong, you know, you would delight by going into one store, and it wasn't only because of the physical products they sold, it was the manner in which you were treated. And you know, I'm sorry that, you know, you cannot get that same sense of physical experience when you shop online, you know, and it's something I personally...
To be honest, Sterling, you can if you know how to do it. It always annoys me when people think you can't do all the senses online, but you can.
But it's not the, you know, it's not, it for me.
You can, because we're forgetting the fact that our brain is activated in the same precise manner when we imagining or remembering certain sensory sensations as when we actually physically experiencing them. But how many websites are activating your smell imagination or your tactile imagination? They're not. They are just showing you the product. It's like a big warehouse. It's like we sort of grabbed a store from 50 years ago and we just popped it online. It doesn't work that way. That has to be changed. The same thing is unfortunately in majority of the stores. Obviously, no, not those designs by Sheridan, but but in the majority of the other ones. Like, you know, when we were working with Swarovski, the best feedback that I got was from a person actually working in the New London store saying that they want to be there, they are happy to be there, that everyone feels welcomed, everyone feels like they're coming into their own home. And that's a collaboration of multitude of senses that we forced the designers and the Swarovski's team to make sure that they've included, and it does show in sales.
Okay, I believe you. I'm sure you're right. Claire, can I just ask you, I mean, we're talking about very, what I would call soft factors, the shopping experience, how you're treated in store, how you interact online. These are things, you know, the human relationship, the brand relationship, you know, they are in some ways intangibles that go towards something. But how do you back that up with, you know, the hard investment into a business where, you know, quite frankly, you're looking for a strong return on investment. You have other, you know, motives, I'm sure, for investing in the company. But how do you account for those soft factors that are becoming increasingly important in terms of how we shop?
Yeah, and I think I would agree with Michael on this, or to build on some of the pieces that he raised, in that for us, I guess we have always placed a high degree of value on a brand itself rather than necessarily just the ability to touch and feel products. So I think for us and the brands that we work with, that probably manifests itself in two ways. Certainly it is that we really support selling offline. I think there is still a large gap, despite the technologies coming through, to really bridge the personalization, the customer experience, and see just the accessibility and availability of those emotions, to Kate's point, around what you do find in store. So whether that be through your own store or through partnerships, then certainly that isn't going anywhere and hasn't gone anywhere for any of our brands. I think the beauty of where we sit now is that, you know, there are real opportunities to improve upon that certainly for a lot of businesses these days. You know, Facebook and Instagram has ultimately become a very crowded place to access your customers, speak to them in an authentic manner. And for us, stores and a store presence and a retail presence really provides an ability to do that. And there are many facets of how that appears in reality, but whether it be brand partnerships, treating your store as an event space, all of those things ultimately for us have driven, I guess, an increased desire actually from our portfolio to explore this as an avenue through which to connect with consumers. And I say that not in a way to sell product necessarily, but really to engage and drive long-term brand value and brand engagement with the customer base. And it gives a feedback loop that ultimately, as much as digital is great for data, you know, really getting in front of your customers and having that one-to-one conversation with them is unparalleled in the physical retail. So, you know, for us in terms of how we invest, that really forms a very strong part of what we're looking for in terms of a brand that will last, you know, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, not necessarily a brand that's kind of flash in the pan, you know, 2 years of great growth on Instagram. So that really is how we think about it, and it's becoming more and more important to how we look at and evaluate the businesses that we invest in.
So I guess that's why somebody like Warpaint must have been so attractive to you, because they did prove their experience in retail with their partnership with John Lewis, the kind of PR and exposure the brand got. So it's building up, I guess, as Kate said, that sort of brand relationship from the very beginning with its customers.
Yeah, I think Warpaint's a fascinating one, really, in that, you know, the brand was ultimately born in a digital world. You know, it was sort of digital first, if you want to use that expression, but ultimately they knew that retail and partnerships with retail stores would be very important. So people like John Lewis, Harvey Nichols, Harrods, I guess all of those formed a basis through which they look to access their customers. But ultimately, even now for them, they are looking at their own physical space, because I guess that's the next iteration of how you own that brand perception. You own those customer engagements, and you own an ability to tell your story one-on-one. So if you hold events or bring in partnerships, you know, all of that is controlled, I guess, in a way that is not necessarily possible from an online perspective, and it brings that emotional response, which is very important.
Sure. Araminta, I mean, you're obviously specialised in social and digital. How do you think that things are going to move forward in social? We've spoken about human relationships and brand relationships and the psychology of shopping and intimacy with brands, which I agree is something that every brand needs for it to be successful. But how do you start building that on, you know, quite a hard platform that I guess, you know, it needs to be engaging to make sure there is that connection with the brand?
Absolutely. And I think the kind of the golden thread that everyone has touched on so far, or the panelists so far, is to stop thinking physical versus digital and bring them together, because there's so much we can learn from one to the other by blurring these lines. And I think the brands that perform the best during lockdown were the brands who stopped thinking about how they could sell through their online channels and started thinking about how they could help. And they dropped everything and they realized that their consumers are in a difficult place right now and they need help, and the world needs help. And we started thinking more globally, more holistically, and more inclusively. And they started using social media and digital marketing properly. So they returned to the kind of consumer journey, which is awareness, consideration, conversion, retention in its most simple form. And they realized that, you know, their brand reach and awareness is where social media sits. And by educating, entertaining, and nurturing their community in lockdown, they saw these benefits that they'll see forever. The brands who sort of make the most of this time now and nurture their community will always do that, because they now understand how digital marketing fits within their model. And again, just to reiterate, rather than thinking physical or digital, blurring it together, this is why digitally native brands like Glossier have worked so well, because everything they do comes back to a common goal of nurturing their community. Every sense that they fill online or offline is completely consistent. How they speak and how they kind of create an authentic connection with their consumer is, you know, it's completely consistent, and it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Okay. I mean, do you think it's, you know, it's interesting if you think about shopping behavior, it almost forms a chain. You know, you've read about something, or you've seen about something, or a friend has mentioned something that you then want to buy for yourself. And let's say the physical presence is still there. You go into a store to buy it, or alternatively, you purchase it online. If there's one disruption to that physical chain, you know, you may never purchase the product again, because somehow or the other, the brand relationship has been somewhat eroded. I mean, what part do you think social will play in, you know, or rather, how will social fit into that chain to strengthen it rather than weaken it?
So I think one of the key changes in the journey that you mentioned is that, you know, we used to have all this control over how our consumer came across, whether it was retail or advertising or whatever it was. And now it's completely in the customer's hands. You know, 70% of our marketing efforts are in the customer's hands. So, you know, we depend on things like, especially more than ever, word of mouth marketing, but also customer review.
Yeah.
You know, when you Google, you don't do anything without Googling it or checking someone's Instagram feed to see how other people find that product. And if you have a bad experience, well, 20 other people who have a similar product to you will be advertising to you on Instagram now, because, you know, that's where you sell on Instagram is through the ads. Everything that's on your organic feed and on your stories and all that kind of thing is all about your kind of creating the connection that Kate was talking about. So I think, you know, that's the clear change, is that influencers are able to step in as your kind of word of mouth marketing. You've got genuine customer reviews on Facebook and Google My Business. You've got photos showing the customers enjoying the product, but you've also got this opportunity to communicate your fundamental values, which is, you know, we're learning a lot from Gen Z, and the fact that they want so much more than a good product. They want to change the world, and every penny they spend is a vote on how the world the kind of world that they want to live in. And I think that communicating these values through social media and this kind of community, you know, whether it's providing a live stream series of yoga workouts or whatever, or skincare routines or whatever it is, like, you know, this real giving and nurturing is kind of that opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Fiona, it would be interesting to gather your thoughts really in terms of, particularly with a focus on the beauty industry, that you know, we think that, you know, we understand how consumers purchase and what they do, but, you know, what part will experiential, do you think, play in the importance for retailers and brands, so that they're actually giving consumers a real reason to go into store?
Yeah, sure. You'll probably know anyway, Stirling, this is something I've been going on about way pre-COVID, that with the way that online shopping was going, retailers really needed, and brands really needed, to be thinking about reasons that you need to go to store over buying things online. Beauty is in the beneficial position that touch, smell, and experience is ultimately important. Particularly if you were to compare it to something that was slightly more commoditized, that's really in that Amazon sphere. So yeah, I anticipate retailers and brands thinking really innovatively over, as Minty said about the blending physical with online, that retail stores will blend as well the excitement and the enjoyable aspects of it, that whether it be foods, trying products, having one-to-one conversations with people. I think all of that it's something that it will be really exciting. And I think the way some brands and retailers are going, they're focusing so much online that I think some of them may forget that bricks and mortar and physical store will always have a place, and therefore the ones that will do well are the ones that are really thinking in a really creative way, so that they're pushing the boundaries and giving exciting reasons for consumers to go to store.
Okay, so we've heard some interesting thoughts in terms of how things are likely to move forward. I know one of our guests has a question. Simon, perhaps if you could just introduce Sarah, so
yeah,
that you can ask a question. Thank you.
Sarah, I'm going to come to you and ask you to unmute, and then if you ask your question and direct who it's asked to as well, that'd be great.
Yes, I think you're talking to me. I don't know if there's any other Sarahs. It's quite a, you know.
Go ahead. It's you, Sarah. That's correct.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting because just to try and imagine what the physical space is going to, how it's going to manifest itself, particularly as we're speaking about beauty and particular with regards to the crisis that's sort of hitting big department stores. Obviously, the latest sort of casualty is Debenhams, but you know, one by one, they're finding that their model of big retail spaces isn't actually financially viable. So I just wonder whether you've had any thoughts, sort of future gazing, what they might look like.
And who would you like to direct your question to?
I don't know. I don't know who's best placed to answer that, really, in terms of their interaction with department stores and maybe also smaller boutique, kind of maybe sort of more Space NKs, kind of those kind of smaller stores where the pharmacy is going to pick up the role and become more like a French pharmacy. You know, how has anyone got any thoughts on how it might?
Michael, I'm sure you would. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of thoughts. I think the Debenhams situation, the large department store, it's the model. It's now been forced into its own corner. It probably, over the period of time I've been working in this industry, it's had its ups and downs. Let's put it that way. You know, it's the whole of the department store industry is having to change. It's really interesting to see retailers such as Macy's looking at new models, sort of almost more concise, edited. My own sort of vision of perhaps not all the department stores by any means. Some of them, you know, will get bigger. If you look at the sort of Selfridges of the world, their development of that site has been just phenomenal over the last 5 or so years. You know, they're using every single inch of space they've got, and probably will find even more as things kind of sort of move back into real space again. But I think what we're seeing a lot of new models. We're seeing a lot of edits, and I mentioned before a lot of new partnerships. The department store model is kind of based around sort of a number of key elements. Fashion is obviously a very important one. Beauty is another very important one. But you haven't got to look too far to see that brands are, if you like, reordering those edits, and retailers as well, reordering the kind of sort of priority and looking at different partnerships. And so, you know, go to the US and look at Kohl's, which is not a department store group that's kind of mentioned very often, but they're, interestingly enough, they've had a big injection of cash from Amazon, and you know, you perhaps might not be surprised to see a sign outside their store saying, you know, it's a returns center for Amazon, so you can take your stores in there, but you can take your goods back and they'll return it back to Amazon. But interestingly, what that's doing is generating a new channel of footfall. It's bringing more people into their stores, and it may not seem kind of, you know, important from one perspective, from a greater perspective, but it's them recognizing that it's people, as Minty mentioned, want to have more control over what they do and how they behave. And they don't just want to, they don't expect necessarily in so much for that cardboard box to arrive at home and then for somebody to come and collect it. They've got to wait in for somebody to collect it. You know, they want to get rid of that object when it suits them. And no surprise to see that the next development with Kohl's is that 200 Sephora stores are going to arrive in their top 200 stores. So that's a really interesting development. On the one hand, you've got something which is kind of, you know, very simple and very practical, which is a footfall-based issue, a convenience-based issue, and then all of a sudden you've got, you know, a huge incentive for a group of people to come into the store to experience beauty at a different level. And you know, we're going to see there are a lot of good examples of that. You know, Ulta going into Target, for instance, in the US. And I only cite the Americans because their market has been much more active than ours has, obviously during lockdown. But I think what we'll see in the context of Debenhams is a remodel. The retail space that Debenhams has is so valuable in terms of its position on high streets and in cities that somebody desperately will be eyeing that up, and it will be the moment at which their wallet and the necessity for them to be able to expand their business or get into physical space. It's only a question of time before that resolves itself. It would be great if it was still called Debenhams, of course, because we love the brand name and we have that history. But let's see what happens. And you have to remember that 50% of digital native brands actually end up in physical space. So, we have to have physical space for all the brands, whether, that are coming in and being invented online, etc. We need the space. And I would say that there'll be a resurgence, but it'll be different. The edit will be different. The weighting of merchandise versus service versus digital, those sorts of things will change. Perhaps the adjacencies, which brands sit together, and you may not necessarily typically have a fashion floor and a beauty floor. It may well be that they're much more jumbled up, but different retailers will create their own DNA by merchandising and presenting their stores in a different way.
I agree with you. I mean, I think the demise of large department stores is going to be an amazing case study for business schools for years to come. But the whole concept of department stores, which is really to have an offer across different departments, to me is perfectly contemporized by Oliver Bonus. You can shop in a small Oliver Bonus store that probably has 2,500, maybe 2,000 square feet of space, and it will sell cards, candles, makeup, clothes, books, mirrors, some items of shopping and so on, which is exactly what the department stores used to offer, but spread over a much larger area. So I think we're already seeing what's going to happen and changes. And Fiona, I know you have some thoughts about what's going to happen to Topshop and their prime locations.
Yeah,
they're not particularly positive, but it would be great to hear your thoughts.
Well, yeah, just to add to what Michael said as well, I saw an article that Mary Portis had written recently that was about those of the retailers that had sadly reached a demise throughout the pandemic. And I think we would all agree that none of those that have gone have been any that have been innovating. And the reason that they have sadly demised is because they weren't innovating fast enough in order to substantiate the space that they had. So I think on top of what we've said already, I think there'll be kind of a natural competition from those that are left being more innovative and those that want to push the boundaries that will then have an effect on speeding things up. Yeah, the Topshop environment is interesting. I actually disagree slightly with Michael in that I think I wouldn't be surprised in the same way that BHS became, parts of it were restaurant and entertainment. I would imagine that there may be, it won't be a pure shopping area, that there might be, restaurants or something similar. And interesting, just to add to what you said on Oliver Bonas, I think the other thing that is interesting is these, and again, this might happen as city regeneration and things, areas such as Cold Drop Yards, that in a way that's a department store, but in a different format, in that you've got all these different restaurants and retail outlets, independent discovery. And personally, I think there's a lot of consumers that would rather go there than something like Debenhams. So we may even see that evolution, that the department store becomes more of a local area and evolves that way.
Okay, no,
yeah, if I can actually add to that, Fiona, I completely agree with you. You mentioned kind of about innovation. One of the things that I've also very much noticed that has been happening from the lockdown is that because people had more time to really reevaluate how they're living and who they're shopping from, is they started noticing how every brand, and especially if we start looking at department stores, are basically the same. At the moment, we have very little differentiation in the market. Those brands that are actually clearly differentiated, but not in terms of necessarily their products, because let's face it, products we pretty much have almost exactly the same, but more in terms of how they are targeting very specific customer profiles. And that is one direction that I believe department stores should also take. But previously, if you look historically on department stores, they have been differentiated predominantly by lifestyle and age. Obviously, those differentiations pretty much we can throw out to the rubbish bin at the moment in terms of customer profiling. But in terms of aspects of personality and values, so what is meaningful for us, what is important, what we stand for, what are our actual personality characteristics, what is our identity, and how therefore we want to represent ourselves, those are the ways we are actually wanting to identify. And that will inevitably mean a completely different mix of brands. And back to Fiona's point, the balance between a service and a product is going to be an enormously important for department stores. And I don't mean service in terms of them being a service provision for the actual brands that they're stocking, like the examples of Schofield or Neighborhood Goods, because they basically sell a service to the brands that they're stocking, which they don't actually stock, but more in terms of the service to the direct customer. And more importantly, we can't forget guys like, for example, JD Sports, who are constantly making sure that they have a limited edition products from certain brands, or even specific, only available in their particular brand, in their particular space, or even more specific, in just that specific store, available products or services or brands. And those are some of the things that those brands that are actually doing really good are making sure that's happening. And more importantly, a constant flexibility. This is, you know, Michael, you will probably hear that again, briefs with flexible, moldable, changeable, all those kind of things, that always is there. But it's not just flexibility in terms of how the space is designed, but how we are using it, how we can quickly change it up. So every single time a customer visits it, there is a balance between familiarity and a surprise, because familiarity gives you safety and surprise gives you delight, which we all were talking about. So those are some of the things that I think will really kind of help the department stores, but they are seriously up for really big revamp right now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's just that if there are investors who are willing to pump money into that, you know, as to whether that's not going to, you know, that's going to succeed or not. Claire, what's your view on that? I mean, do you think, I mean, you know, we know that beauty has been a frenetic area for mergers and acquisitions over the last 5 years. And so, you know, there's two questions. The first is in response to Kate's thoughts about how much of that space will be returned to retail. I would have thought it's going to cost huge amounts of money. So it would be interesting to get your perspective. And then also, what part do you think beauty is going to play, beauty M&A is going to play over the next, you know, 3 years, for example? So sorry, two questions in one, forgive me.
No, that's all right. And I think, yeah, just to build on, I guess, what we were just covering, really, I guess I draw interesting parallels, particularly with what some of the department stores are doing in the fashion sector, in that now there is innovation in that sense, in that they are all utilising broadly third-party businesses to operate resale models, rental models, all of that piece that ultimately drives consumers into store for the newness and the excitement, and also for, to Araminta's point, because they really value an ability that the department store is speaking to them as a customer and taking on board that they don't necessarily always want to buy newness, they care about the environment through and through. And I guess for us, I think in terms of beauty, I mean, the reason why it has been so attractive, both for investment and also for acquisition, is that ultimately, it operates in a world where, you know, virality and referrals and word of mouth marketing is very common. Ultimately, if I'm the user of a fantastic foundation, I probably tell my friends, my family, and anyone else who will listen. And I guess a lot of industries don't necessarily have the beauty of that. And equally, as much as the testing environment and samples has had to sort of disappear through 2020, I don't think any of us would say that that isn't going to come back in some form or other. And I think for us, both from the large corporates that we work with, but also from the brands and the innovation we're seeing, again, that's a really exciting way to drive people into retail, is that touching, feeling, trying. And I do think that will evolve from where we are. So some of the digital sampling businesses where, you know, you do have that seamless online, offline experience. And I think brands and retailers are just starting the conversation on a different foot to say, how can we maximize the data and the visibility that we have as a partnership, both for our brands and our consumers, in order to drive a better customer experience? I don't think, you know, any of the guys that have been challenged on the high street necessarily ever thought about customers' perception, you know, ensuring that tracking visibility of in-store and online was easy, kind of the endless aisle and all of that piece that will become commonplace and will become a necessity. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I don't think that the demise of retail, or as it stands today, has impacted our view on the attractiveness of particularly the beauty market as a space. And, you know, ultimately all of the tailwinds that have always existed and the acquisitions that are made, I can't see any of those slowing down. Yes, I think there will be a continued focus on brand positioning, customer engagement and community, but for us that was always the center of where we were. So yeah, we still remain, I guess, very excited about it as a sector.
That's good to hear. That's good. So Araminta, I mean, I know when we've spoken before, one of the terms that you use is the words phygital, where physical meets digital. And can you just explain your thoughts on that more, you know, in terms of how that will strengthen brands, will enhance the shopping experience?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on the idea earlier that rather than thinking of your digital marketing and your physical marketing as two opposing factors, we actually start to look at them more holistically. One of the companies I work with, Atlantic Technologies, is a sort of digital transformation company. And one of the biggest trends in that industry that they talk about is creating a single source of truth of data, because you really get to know the customer journey and you really are able to personalize your efforts towards each customer, whether it's online through email marketing. Segmentation is becoming increasingly important, or even, you know, how you deliver your products and services to them. So I think that's going to be a big thing for 2021, is having so much more holistic view of your customer and how they're behaving. So when instead of breaking up your marketing into PR, retail, social media, email marketing, you're actually breaking it up into the customer journey and saying, right, we've got awareness, consideration, conversion, retention. Where do each of these pieces fit in? And actually becoming more goal driven rather than, you know, what is our goal within awareness? We want to grow a tribe, grow a community, and create a massive sort of database of customers here who are aware of us here. And then we can make them consider our product, whether that's signing up to an email newsletter or coming to visit us within a store or coming to an event or playing with the products in a physical space. And then you've got the conversion, which is where they actually make the transaction. They may go back online for that, or they may do it in store for convenience. And then there's the retention, which is sort of, you know, the ongoing events or the social media. And so when you start to look at it like this in a goal-driven manner, you kind of reduce and take away the conflict between physical or digital, and they become one. And I think that's what the consumer wants. They want to walk into a store and, you know, have a brand experience and connect with the sales staff, and it's, you know, have that retail theater. And then if they leave and they get an advert from the same brand through local targeting on social media, when they go onto Instagram, they can then follow them and sort of, you know, it's that warm-up marketing strategy of just becoming a little bit less us versus them, which is kind of conversations that we have every day between Araminta Marketing and Sheridan and Co.
Okay, I mean, that's an interesting perspective. I mean, I am still fascinated and satisfied, you know, beyond the point of satisfaction. I'm not quite sure of the right word. But for example, I ordered some products before Christmas from a company who specialise in men's shaving products. And I ordered a brush and a new shaving foam and so on. Their service was unbelievable. Even in the week before Christmas, they promised me that I would have the products the next day. And I did. I can tell you that it was my birthday about 10 days ago, and I won't tell you how old I am, but I'm still waiting for our son's gifts. They haven't arrived yet, even though they were supposed to arrive on the particular day. And that to me is inexcusable. You know, it's broken my chain. I didn't need to see it physically. It's broken my chain of respect for that brand, that they can't tell me where my gifts are. Yet another company who operate in a very similar area were able to promise and deliver the next day. You know, despite all the problems we're supposed to have with, you know, postmen being off sick and the courier companies, you know, overwhelmed with demand. And I think that chain in our heads is so important, and you know, it needs to be reinforced at every opportunity. Fiona, I don't know your thoughts on, you know, how products can do that, and how, if they don't, you know, what then happens in terms of the consumer's attitude to that brand.
Yeah, I think from a product perspective, linking in with what Kate was saying on the intimacy side, I think that is directly related to the transparency that customers are demanding from brands now, which is particularly ingredients that are excluded, sustainability claims, whatever that actually means, because we know it's not something that's widely defined. So I think that is probably the biggest overarching theme that we'll see at a product level that I expect to continue. And consumers will be even more demanding, and it's the most important aspect for brands to be defining and communicating. Yeah. Because there's a lot of people doing it. There's a lot of people doing it somewhat deceptively as well. I think that will continue to drive a lot of the requests that consumers have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, we've got about 5 minutes left. Could I ask each of you just to give a couple of minutes to your thoughts, your hopes, and how retail is going to evolve in the year 2021? Claire, would you like to start?
Yeah, happy to kick off. I think for me, it will definitely revolve around delighting customers, hybrid spaces, whether that be co-working, events. I think all of that kind of comes to the fore. And I think the retail spaces that enable brands to really put their stamp on it, I guess, in a cost-efficient manner, trial new things, sort of the more tech way of working in terms of iterate quickly and fail fast. I think perhaps some of that needs to come across, but yeah, I will see a lot of our portfolio and a lot of brands looking to retail space earlier. I think the beauty of 2021 is that it affords an ability to test these channels in ways that we've never seen before. So I think for us that means a lot of innovation and excitement to come.
That sounds very good. Kate, I notice you've written me a note that says radical transparency. I'm intrigued. Can you cover that in a couple of minutes?
It was from what Fiona was saying, and we are currently working with a new client, sustainable and ethical fashion brand, and we really kind of, trying to sort of push the borders on what it actually means. And one of the key values is really transparency, but, to the point of, basically becoming entirely naked, and showcasing everything that we're doing. And that's what the customers are obviously demanding, is that, exactly, Brewdog, great example of that, precisely. That's what customers are demanding, because that also builds actually intimacy, that builds relationship, that builds an ability to control over the brand. So, it's not something that is just cool and good to have. It's something that also showcases an actual social responsibility in terms of, how the brands are trying to impact the world. Because that aspect of us buying products are not anymore just about because we need to fulfill a basic need of something, or I don't know, you need to shave or whatever else. We are buying products also because we want to make an impact on the world. And our decisions to buy are very kind of driven by the meaning personally to us, but also by what we want to kind of almost leave as a legacy, and how we are voting almost for a better world. And those are some of the things, some of the shifts that definitely happened throughout the lockdowns, because people had more time for introspection. So that transparency, that sustainability, ethical, you know, actually trying to hit all of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, those are some of the things that every brand will need to do. Then obviously another thing that a lot of you have mentioned, and I'm so glad about it, is that aspect of community. So Claire, you have reminded everyone, obviously, about Glossier, who really kind of done extremely well in building the communities. And, you know, communities are something that is becoming sort of the next big strategic element for the brands. And, you know, we worked with some of our brands, like, you know, with Snack, for example, in building their community strategy. And it's not easy. There's a lot of elements that need to come in play, but when you use it well, and don't forget that buildup of community happens also in physical form and happens better, faster, and more in depth in physical environments, that is something that definitely going to happen. The third thing I think is super important is that aspect of differentiation, which is also obviously supported by localism. That is not going anywhere. It's just going to have slightly different form. But I'm super happy about it, because maybe we can actually rejuvenate our high streets that seriously need a big, you know, influx of cash and, you know, and really great concepts. But it's, you know, we can't forget that brands create cultures, they create societies, they create what we believe in. And what we're going to put as a mix of services and products and brands in our local environments, this is what's going to create that neighborhood. This is what's going to define how people interact with each other in that neighborhood. This is what's going to impact the level of crime in that neighborhood, and so on, so on. So it's not, you know, we can't forget that our brands are part of a bigger society organisms. So even just basic stuff, ask yourself that question: what is the big impact you want to make in the world? And that is the thing that you're coming back to as a brand. And that is what's going to drive the customers towards you.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Fiona, your thoughts?
Yeah, just very much going on from what we spoke about on the transparency theme is, I think it's really hard for brands to know how to tread that line best, that you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't when it comes to what you share, how you share it, how you justify the decisions that you've made. So I think it's really important for brands and retailers to be true to themselves, to not try and say what the customers want, to say truly what that actually means. And we're also seeing trends on that more product level. Ordinary started with putting a real focus on percentages. We've got other brands that are sharing full percentage breakdowns and all their clinical trials and things, which again becomes more of a balancing act for brands over what they share, the impact that has on their IP, and so on and so forth. So I think it all comes down to being true to your brand rather than what you think customers want. And I think that will stand the brands in good stead.
Thank you. Araminta, just a couple of thoughts in a couple of minutes.
Yes, I'll try and keep it brief. I think my summary would be: do not expect your social media marketing to work if you're simply posting products on your stories and your feed. Beauty brands have the ability to change the world, and we've seen brands like Fenty Beauty and Morphe Brushes, who Sheridan and Co have worked with, prove this time and time again. They do not stay quiet on important issues. They've taken everyone who's ever felt like an outsider and brought them into their community, whether this is LGBT, ethnical diversity, whether it's people in wheelchairs, people, you know, showing true body inclusivity. They're not scared to talk about, you know, they rose up during the Black Lives Matter community. They're not scared to talk about true flaws and change the, you know, toxic masculinity and all that kind of thing. So scroll down their Instagram feeds and see how truly diverse and inclusive and how they speak up. Do not stay silent and put your community first. Think about how you can help, and then link how you sell into how you help people.
Okay, thank you. Michael, is there a couple of points you want to make?
Sure. I think already for the sort of project work that we're getting through now and thinking about the future, there's a definite step change to people's views. We're hearing, much more about retail as a marketing platform rather than just as an opportunity to sell through. So that's really good news for me. It means that brands, retailers are recognizing that there needs to be this step change. I want to see as much connection as possible with customers in the sense that, we have to find ways of finding out more about what customers' expectations are and then deliver them. Know who the communities are, know who's coming into your department store, know who's coming into your boutique. All those things obviously become really, really important, and then develop your programs around them rather than coming up with an idea and hoping it'll work. And I just say that whether it's small or large, do it well. To your point, Stirling, getting the product to people, in a timely fashion is so important. So whatever you're going to do, whether it's a tiny initiative or whether it's a big initiative, do it well. I think that's really important. And I think one thing that perhaps hasn't been touched on so much today is the importance of the people who actually work in retail, the value we place on the assistants and the beauticians and all the people who are actually at the coalface. I think I would like to cry out for them to have greater recognition and to be empowered more so to because they will be the ones that have, to ultimately nurture these relationships with customers. And I think there's a big piece of work to be done, a lot to learn from how they want to operate in retail and how they will help brands to, be successful.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to wrap up with a couple of things. First of all, there was a quote from Dan Williams, who's MD of Orient Personal Care, on radical transparency, and he gave the brand Brewdog as a particularly brilliant brand. And I would also, I think, Kate, you obviously, your focus is human beings. That's the polite word I guess we have to call ourselves. Michael, you also mentioned that about expectations. And for me, I think the biggest change, the thing that can happen that will have the most change is that we are, as consumers, and we all consume, are treated as humans. Okay, I think, for example, I would just give one very quick example. Shopping centres need to have free access. That isn't just malls. That means, the high street. You have to be able to park nearby. You have to have brilliant transport links. And all of these things about treating people as human beings. If you have to wait for 45 minutes for a bus to get to your favorite shopping mall, it's not going to happen. It really isn't. And so, I guess it's not a wish, because I can see it happening and I can understand how it's happening. But I think that all brands, be they retail, be they in beauty or be in other areas, have to treat us as human beings, because by doing that, enormous change will actually happen. So I'd just like to thank everybody, our panel, for their valuable insights, their great contributions. There was a very wide, diverse range of input and comments. So thank you all. Thank you to all our attendees. Interestingly enough, we had exactly 100 attendees, and unfortunately we did this on a website that had a lock on 100 attendees, but we did actually have about 50 people who are wanting to hear all this again, so we may come back and do it again sometime. But thank you for everyone who attended, everyone who participated in the panel, those who asked questions, and stay safe and take care of yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.